It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not.
Kamala
I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Well, this is a fun follow-up to a video we recently did about how controversial political commentator Bill Maher and MSNBC pundit Stephanie Ruhle tried to stage an intervention for never-Trump conservative writer Bret Stephens and persuade him to vote for Vice VP Harris. Well, apparently, Donald Trump watched that episode of Real Time with Bill Maher and was so triggered that he went on a lengthy rant on Truth Social, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends. Couple of clips. I guess that will play just to refresh your memory about the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher and some of the things that Bill Maher and Stephanie Ruhle and even Bret Stephens had to say about Donald Trump. But to get to the fun part, the really fun part, Donald Trump watched that episode of Real Time with Bill Maher because he obsessively watches anything that is said about him, including by his political rivals and critics, because he's so thin-skinned and narcissistic. This is what he had to say. The ratings challenge Bill Maher on his increasingly boring show on HBO is really having a hard time coping with Trump derangement syndrome. He is a befuddled mess, sloppy and tired, and every conversation with B and C list guest seems to start with or revert back to me this week. He had dumb as a rock bimbo Stephanie Ruhle from MSNBC on the show, along with a Trump-hating loser Bret Stephens, who seemed totally confused and unsure of himself, very much like Ma himself. Stephen should find himself another line of work because I'm driving the failing New York Times absolutely crazy. And it is very hard, perhaps impossible, for a writer to write well of me without suffering the wrath of the degenerate editors who, with a push from the top, have gone insane. They apologized to their readers in 2016 for their complete and total miss, and they'll do it again. In November, the failing New York Times is a badly run, quote, newspaper, end quote, that has totally lost its way, put it to sleep. Yeah, so that is absolutely not the incoherent, hypocritical screed of a man who's clearly not triggered, right? Of course he is. Of course he's triggered. He's absolutely triggered, so fragile. And this is part of the reason why Bill Maher loves to troll him as much as he does. But not the first time that, Trump has publicly complained about MSNBC and Bill Maher. It's a recurring pastime of his to just vent because he can't handle any sort of criticism. And I love it. It's always fun to point out when Donald Trump gets triggered because it helps undermine this notion, this myth that Donald Trump is a strong figure. He's not. He's weak. He's fragile. He's effortlessly manipulated and baited, and prodded and poked. Because again, he exudes insecurity more than any politician we have ever seen. But let's revisit or look at some of the things that were said by Bret Stephens. Again, a conservative, never-Trump New York Times columnist, Stephanie Ruhle, who is an MSNBC pundit, and Bill Maher during the course of their conversation.
It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not. I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Kamala Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
I don't know.
So it's unclear to me how there could be an informed.
So again, just to be clear, Bret Stephens has been a long-standing critic of Donald Trump. He was not, with all due respect to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. Bret Stephens had Trump's number from the very beginning and was quite honest about it. He's been a vocal critic of Donald Trump since Trump came down that escalator, so kudos to him in that respect. But 7Y Rule is visibly frustrated. And I don't blame her, because it's like, well, given that you correctly identified Trump for the loser and threat that he was before he became president, and then he went through that entire election cycle, then 4 years of the Trump presidency, and then 4 years of him campaigning for the presidency again. It's a lot of time to really understand how incomparably unfit Donald Trump is for the White House, genuinely, both in terms of temperament, intellect, record, aspirations, character. Donald Trump is just uniquely unqualified. And so Stephanie Rue's position is okay. Listen, an eligible voter, you're an influential commentator, you might be able to make in some small way a difference, not just with your vote, but also the audience that you have among conservatives. Principled conservatives, if such things still exist, who are also eligible voters, you could help swing the election, and a responsible person, in my opinion, who's an eligible voter, should vote for the better option, the better viable option. And there's only one VI-able option other than Trump Harris, the Vice President of the United States. And she is better. She's smarter than Trump. She's more qualified than Trump. And to the extent that a conservative, never Trump Republican like Brett Stevens has issues with her on policy, again, I would just redirect him to Liz Cheney, whom I imagine he respects quite a bit, who voted with Trump 93% of the time when she was a seating member of Congress and he was the president. She has said it before. She'll say it again. I imagine they can survive. Republicans can survive 4 years of quote-unquote bad policy. Now, I imagine that the Democratic policy would be quite good, given that Democrats are just objectively far better on policy than the Republicans. But be that as it may, if your position is, listen, their policies aren't conservative, or go, I don't think they're good policies, well, you can survive 4 to 8 years of bad policy, particularly in divided government, which is very likely, right? The Republicans enjoy a supermajority on the United States Supreme Court. It's very likely that we will lose the Senate. We'll probably get back to House. So in multiple timelines, there's divided government. Why on earth would you abstain from voting for the vice president? Stephanie Rule is right. What answer could she possibly give that would make her equally bad as Trump or worse, such that you wouldn't vote for her? There's really not a satisfying, honest answer to that question. Another clip I want to play. It's about Trump. But in the context of the recent allegations made by the MAGA Republican Trump, endorsed Lieutenant Governor of my state, North Carolina, Mark Robinson. I have 1 minute to ask about Mark Robinson.
I have 1 minute to ask about Mark Robinson.
Oh.
How is it the Republicans keep nominating people like that? I mean, I could go through a long list of people like that who are just crazy, Herschel Walker, where was that, Georgia? I mean, before that, remember the guy with unintentional rapes or whatever that?
No, I think they were intentional.
Or what he would said.
When I read about Robinson yesterday, and I was like, yikes, black Nazi, and then I saw on a porn site, I'm like, you have to be kidding. But you can't expect the Republican Party to ask him or anyone else to step aside when the head of your party is Donald Trump.
But don't they vet?
She's right. You have to remember Donald Trump is a convicted felon, convicted on 34 counts. He's an adjudicated fraudster, an adjudicated rapist again. You know, not only did a jury find him liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll and defaming her, the presiding judge of the case said that in terms of common parlance, the way that we use these words, the jury found Donald Trump raped E.E.G. Carroll. It's a fact. And her point is that is the moral standard of the Republican Party. Now, that is the leader of the Republican Party. That's the guy who embodies or is supposed to embody the Republican Party's values and policy prescriptions. So isn't this almost inevitable that somebody like Mark Robinson, And if anything, even though there are so many crazy, magry Republican politicians who say controversial things, probably make the arguments kind of stunning that there aren't more Mark Robinsons in the Republican Party than what there are given the standard that Donald Trump has established for his authoritarian cult. It's comments like these. I imagine that so triggered Donald Trump when he watched this episode. And yet I think we have to delight in Donald Trump's triggering. I think we have to delight in the fact that he's so upset that Bill Maher, Brett Stevens, and Stephanie Ruhle are insulting him or describing him correctly. He probably looks at it as insult. I would say it's just an accurate description of fact. But yeah, it's always fun when Donald Trump gets triggered. And again, it goes to show that despite projecting strength, despite embodying strength, he's actually the very embodiment of fragility in the meantime. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like. And if you stuck around at the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comment so I can thank you for your support. And until next time, I'll see you soon.